Ethan Wilder had learned the language of the canyon the way other men learned conversation. The wind shifting between the rocks told him when a storm was coming. The bird's sudden silence warned him of predators. Even the dirt beneath his boots spoke in small, honest signs. That morning felt wrong from the moment he stepped outside his cabin. The air was too still, the sky too pale, as if the world were holding its breath. He slung his rifle over his shoulder and headed toward the ridge where he had set his traps the night before, expecting the usual, perhaps a coyote, maybe a fox. Never this. The scream cut through the canyon like a blade. It was sharp, human, full of pain and terror. Ethan froze for half a heartbeat, then ran toward the sound, boots slipping over loose stones, heart hammering against his ribs. When he reached the narrow pass between two towering walls of rock, he saw her. She was half kneeling, half fallen to the ground, one leg trapped in the steel jaws he had set. Her dark hair was tangled around her face, streaked with dust and sweat. Blood traced a thin line down her ankle where the trap bit into her skin. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold. They were wide, black, and blazing with a fear so raw it felt like a living thing between them. Apache, he realized instantly. Not from her clothes alone, but from the way she held herself even in pain, tense, proud, ready to fight. The moment she saw him, she stopped crying out. Her body went still, like a deer caught in the sights of a hunter. Her gaze flicked to the rifle on his shoulder, then back to his face. She didn't need to speak for him to understand what she thought he was. Slowly, deliberately, Ethan lifted both hands away from his weapon. "Hey, it's all right," he said softly, though he knew she might not understand the words. "I'm not here to hurt you." She didn't answer. Her fingers tightened around a sharp stone she'd picked up, knuckles white with tension. She was ready to use it if he came too close. He approached one careful step at a time, moving as he did with frightened horses. He crouched beside the trap, keeping his movements slow, predictable. Up close, he could see how young she was, late teens, perhaps, and how fiercely she tried to hide her pain. "This is my fault," he murmured, more to himself than to her. With gentle hands, he worked the mechanism of the trap, until the jaws finally loosened and released her leg. She flinched but did not cry out again. For a long moment, neither of them moved. She studied him with suspicion, as though waiting for the moment the kindness would turn to cruelty. Ethan met her gaze steadily, hoping she could see the truth there. He had set a trap for an animal. Instead, fate had placed a wounded, terrified girl in his path, and nothing about his life would be the same again. Ethan kept his distance as he guided her back toward the cabin, walking slowly enough that she could follow without feeling chased. She limped but refused his help, her jaw tight with stubborn pride. Every few steps she glanced at him over her shoulder, as though expecting him to change his mind and become the monster she feared. The cabin came into view at the edge of the trees, a small, weathered structure that had sheltered Ethan's solitude for years. Now it felt strangely exposed, as if the presence of another soul had shifted something fragile in the air. Inside, he set a bowl of water on the rough wooden table and placed a piece of dried meat beside it. Then he stepped back toward the door, deliberately turning his body sideways so he wouldn't seem threatening. She hovered near the entrance, eyes scanning the room, taking in every corner, every shadow, every possible danger. Only when he moved farther away did she finally cross the threshold. She ate slowly, cautiously, as if each bite were a test. Ethan pretended not to watch, but he noticed everything. The way she kept her injured leg tucked close, the way her free hand never fully relaxed, the way her eyes never stopped measuring him. When night fell, the silence grew heavier. The wind whispered through the cracks in the cabin walls, and the fire popped softly in the hearth. Ethan laid out a blanket, on the floor a few feet away from his own bed, and then turned his back to her, offering trust before asking for any in return. He could feel her gaze on him long after the light dimmed. Sleep came in fragments. At some point in the darkness, he shifted and noticed a faint movement. His eyes opened just enough to see her sitting upright, a small knife clenched in her hand, the blade angled toward the door rather than toward him. She wasn't planning to attack. She was preparing to survive. The realization sat heavy in his chest. The next days passed in careful quiet. She spoke no words, and Ethan didn't force any from her. He showed her the stream behind the cabin, leaving space between them. He left food where she could take it without feeling cornered. He cleaned and wrapped her wounded ankle when she finally allowed him to, her face unreadable as his fingers worked with gentle precision. Then one afternoon, everything shifted. Ethan came back from checking the far traps with blood darkening his sleeve. He had slipped on loose rock and scraped his shoulder badly against a jagged ledge. The pain was sharp, but he barely noticed it until he pushed open the cabin door. She looked up instantly, eyes narrowing at the sight of his injury. He tried to wave it off, but when he sat down heavily, the room tilted. A moment later, he felt her presence close. She didn't ask permission. She simply knelt beside him, took the cloth from his pack, and began to bind his wound with careful, practiced hands. Her touch was light. Her expression was serious. When she finished, she pulled away, just... Sound of hooves shattered the calm long before Ethan saw the riders. It began as a distant thunder, faint enough to be mistaken for the wind rolling across the plains. But his body recognized the rhythm instantly. Men on horseback. More than one. He moved to the window and peered through the narrow crack in the wood, his stomach tightening as he caught sight of dark shapes cresting the low ridge beyond the trees. They were armed. That much was obvious, even from a distance. Behind him, the girl had gone completely still. Ethan didn't turn around, but he could feel her fear like heat against his back. It was different from before, sharper, as though she knew exactly what this meant. The riders slowed as they neared the cabin, their voices drifting toward him in broken pieces. Rough laughter, cruel amusement, then words that made his blood run cold. Sheriff in the South offered coin for her. Apache girl's worth more alive than dead. Ethan's jaw clenched. So that was it. She wasn't lost. She was being hunted. He could have stayed silent. He could have pretended the cabin was empty, waited for them to pass. That would have been safer. That would have been easier. Instead, he reached for his rifle. He stepped outside before they could knock. The men reined in their horses, eyes sweeping over him with open suspicion. One of them, thick-bearded and smirking, tilted his head. "You out here alone, old man?" Ethan kept his voice steady. "Always have been." Their gazes slid past him toward the dark doorway behind his back. One rider nudged his horse forward. "Heard tell there's a girl wandering these parts." "Then you heard wrong." The silence that followed was heavy and dangerous. The bearded man spat into the dirt. "Mind if we take a look?" Ethan tightened his grip on the rifle. Yes, that single word changed everything. The first shot came from them. The second came from him. Chaos exploded in the clearing. Horses screamed, men shouted, bullets tore through bark and wood. Ethan moved on instinct, years of survival guiding every step. When the dust finally settled, 2 riders had fled and 1 lay groaning in the dirt, too afraid to rise. Ethan didn't chase them. He simply watched until they disappeared beyond the ridge. When he turned back toward the cabin, she stood in the doorway. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, but she did not look at him with fear anymore. She looked at him as though she were seeing him for the first time. He lowered the rifle slowly, unsure of what to say, unsure if words even mattered. She stepped forward. One cautious step, then another. Her voice, when it came, was barely louder than the wind. "Friend." The word hit harder than any bullet, and in that quiet moment, Ethan understood the truth. He had never been her captor. He had been her choice.